Hi, everybody. My name's Jeff Watson. I'm the staff hydrogeologist at Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District. Thanks for the presentation. I think Dr. Gannon's presentation is going to be a great segue into the groundwater systems and how what we've been seeing in our surface, weather, and climate in terms of drought is also propagating into the groundwater system. So a little bit on how recharge happens for both the Edwards and the Trinity Aquifers, which are the aquifers that the Barton Springs District manages within Travis and Hays County. So generally, as Dr. Gannon mentioned, most of the recharge for our karst aquifers occurs through direct recharge through surface water streams that are flowing over the recharge zone. Both of our aquifers are karst aquifers, carbonate karst aquifers, which generally means that the groundwater flows quickly through the system. A lot of the groundwater flow and storage is happening within solutionally enlarged caves and conduits. With the Edwards in particular, it is closely connected with the surface water system. So generally what we see with these aquifers is that when we're in a wet climatic cycle, the aquifer responds quickly and groundwater levels and spring flows go up in response to that rainfall and flow. And then when we're in drought cycles, due to things like increased evapotranspiration, as well as increased pumping due to demand, because often groundwater demand increases during times of drought because the lawns are getting brown and they need to irrigate more. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, irrigation of lawns is one of the biggest uses of groundwater, and so that can have a big impact on the demand of pumping. So with the Trinity Aquifer, it's similar to the Edwards, although I would say generally the Trinity is, especially our portion of the confined Trinity, is slightly less directly connected with the surface water system, but we do see the Trinity also responding to these weather and climatic drought events. So generally you can see here in the light green, this is the Edwards recharge zone. This is where Edwards geologic units are outcropping on the surface, and we have streams flowing over those units and directly recharging the aquifers. On the right here, you can see the delineated flow paths within the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer. So you can see as water flows in Onion Creek, Bear Creek, and Slaughter Williamson, Barton as well, that water directly recharges the aquifer and then makes its way up north towards the Colorado River to either Barton Springs or Cold Springs, which is the primary sort of drain outlet point for that groundwater system. So, generally what we see with the Edwards Aquifer is whenever we're getting a lot of flow in these streams that are flowing over the recharge zone, we'll see aquifer levels and spring flow levels going up. Over the last few years when we've been in drought, most of these important streams for recharge have been dry. So, generally a good rule of thumb is that when we see a lot of flow in the creeks, then the aquifer's in pretty good shape. With the Trinity, it's a little bit more complicated. So this is the contributing zone in the darker green here. They call it the contributing zone for the Edwards Aquifer, but it's also the recharge zone for the Trinity Aquifer. So this is most of it is outside of our district within Hays Trinity Groundwater Conservation District. So any surface water flow that doesn't directly recharge the Trinity Aquifer will make its way via these streams over the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone. But again, a lot of these streams are showing very low flows. Really the Blanco River is the only stream that's had consistent flow throughout the last few years. And even the Blanco is fairly low. So it's been not a good condition for aquifer recharge. All right, and some of this stuff we've already kind of talked about. So this was back in October 2023, before we got some rainfall. This is the U.S. drought monitor maps, which you'll see these if you come to our meetings. We've got one of these on our drought update. Generally the hill country is where most of our water is coming from that's recharging our aquifers. And you can see that we were in exceptional drought back then in October of 2023. We also did a water level study around this time on the Trinity Aquifer, and I'll show you a little bit of that data later on. Moving forward to May, you can see we did get some rainfall in October, and then a pretty good rainfall event in January. So at least on the surface, it looks like conditions have improved, although still, if you look at those areas in Hays and Travis County, where our recharge zone is, they're still considered to be in drought. And so even though things are green right now and the plants look happy, what you'll see in the following slides is that the groundwater system still hasn't recovered. Here's another figure that you'll see if you come to our meetings and look at our drought update. So this is our average precipitation of Camp Mabry and Bergstrom rain gauges. And then you can see here the monthly deviation of average, these sort of reddish-orange bars on the top here. So if it's above 0, then it's above average rainfall for that month. If it's below 0, it's below average rainfall. So this is basically a different way to visualize the data that was presented in the last presentation. But you can see, the overall trend is, if we look back at the last 2 years, and kind of sum up all of these bars, most of the bars are below average rainfall for that particular month. And if you sum them up, we've got a 24-month deficit of 22 inches. So we haven't really been getting the rainfall that we need to fully recover and be able to say that we're out of drought. All right, moving on to look at the Edwards groundwater levels. So this is our Lovelady Edwards index well. This is one of 2 drought triggers that the district uses to declare our different stages of drought. The second one is the Barton Springs flow, as reported by the USGS gauge. If either one of those triggers drops below a given drought threshold, then typically the recommendation is that we'll go into the next stage of drought. So you can see, if you look back 2019, which was a relatively wet climatic period, groundwater levels were well above average. But you can see the trend over the last 3 or 4 years is that as we've gone into drought, as we've had this accumulated deficit in rainfall, over time, these levels have been going down. So, on a sort of annual basis, we do get these recoveries. The Edwards is a resilient system, and if we get rainfall, it will bounce back quickly. But we need a lot more rainfall than what we have been getting to be able to get sort of back up to that even average or above average groundwater levels. And you can see here, back before we got rainfall in October, our district declared stage 4 drought for the first time since we implemented our new drought triggers, which I think was back in 2010. So we were in pretty dire conditions. We did get some rain that sort of allowed us to bounce back into stage 2, but I think we need a lot more rain to be able to say that we're out of the woods. Moving on to Barton Springs flow, which is our other drought stage trigger. It's a similar trend to what you're seeing with Lovelady. So you got our sort of mean historic average flow of 66 cubic feet per second. In general, Barton Springs tends to be a little bit more flashy and responsive than our Lovelady trigger. which is why we like the Love Lady trigger, because it's a little bit more representative of sort of longer term trends in the aquifer, and it's kind of more muted and gradual. So we do have specific large rainfall events where we'll see Barton Springs flow bounce back up above that average quickly, quicker than the Love Lady well. But then fairly quickly, once the rain stops, that spring flow drops back down to where it was before. So we're seeing similar trends looking at our Barton Springs flow. Moving over to the Trinity Aquifer. So this purple guy here is the Borheim well, which is one of our confined Trinity Aquifer wells. This is actually the well with the longest period of record within our district, which isn't very long. It's a little over 20 years. But you can see, similar to the Edwards, the Trinity does have these little muted, upward responses when we get rainfall. But if you look at the overall trend for the last 5 years, since we've sort of entered this drought period, the overall trend is down. You can kind of track the valleys and the peaks. And we actually haven't yet recovered back to our 2023 levels of water, or groundwater levels. The upper Trinity is hydraulically separated from the middle Trinity, and it's generally going to have a different behavior from the middle Trinity, so it's not necessarily representative of this sort of longer term trends. But you can see the upper Trinity, this particular well at Sky Ranch, it will respond to these short-term rainfall events, but then fairly quickly it tends to drop back down to that baseline level. So this is a figure from our Trinity groundwater level study that we did in fall of last year that I mentioned earlier. This is a groundwater decline map. So if we take all of the wells that we collected water levels from in 2018 and then compare those same wells, the water levels in those wells, to 2023, sort of subtract and plot the difference, that's what this map is. So the higher the number is the groundwater, is the higher the level of groundwater decline, how much groundwater level has gone down. So you can see we've got sort of these dark red areas. There's a big cone of depression in Dripping Springs area, sort of southwestern Travis County. Most of our exempt Trinity wells are concentrated down here in this southwest portion of our district, and we're seeing up to 90 to 100 foot declines in some of those areas. And then as well, if you go out to Blanco County, they've got some declines in the area of the city of Blanco. So the Trinity Aquifer is certainly looking at declines right now and has not bounced back as quickly as the Edwards. And again, both aquifers still haven't bounced out of drought conditions. Okay, so let's look at spring flow from the Trinity. So these are two springs that feed base flow in the Blanco Basin. Not many people know about Pleasant Valley Spring, but it's actually the largest spring by volume in the Trinity, in the Hill Country. It's discharges into the Blanco River just upstream of Fisher Store Road. And we installed a gauge back in 2017, and so you can see here we've got these sort of short-term peaks in flow in response to individual rainfall events, but again, when we get into the last few years of data, we're dropping below 10 CFS consistently, and it even got down to 2 and 3 CFS when we were in the worst of it last fall. And then Jacob's Well Spring, a lot of people have heard about Jacob's Well Spring and the issues that they're having out there. We had an extended period, basically most of 2023, Jacob's Well Spring was not flowing, and the photo on the first slide that you guys saw was of Jacob's Well sort of being dry for the first time since its history. Its flow has stopped before, but last year was really the first time that the water level dropped below the surface of the spring outlet. So again, these springs, and you can see in recent months, Jacob's Well did start flowing again, but it really hasn't been consistently flowing, and without more rainfall, it's likely that it will stop flowing again soon. We've already seen this map in the last presentation, but this is the next 3 months, the NOAA's outlook for what they expect. So again, we're expecting above average temperature, which that means drier soil conditions, which means when it does rain, it's less of that water is going to make its way into the aquifer and recharge the aquifer. And then equal chances or potentially, slightly above equal chances of getting rainfall. So, historically, May and June are our wettest months in the hill country area, and we really need to get a lot of rainfall in the next couple of months to turn things around. So takeaway is really that we're not out of the woods yet. So we're still in the midst of a multi-year drought. Rainfall in recent months is nice, the plants are happy, but as far as the aquifer, storage and recharge is concerned, we still need a lot more water. And then, I would say May and June, let's pray for rain in the next couple of months because we really need it. Right. Any questions?
So both presentations alluded to a deficit, obvious deficit over the last several years. In order for us to gain a surplus, so you had a 22-inch deficit and a 15.5-inch deficit. Do we need to have an equal surplus to that to get ourselves back to normal? So if we're 22-inch deficit, does that mean we need to get a 44-inch?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I don't think it means that we need a 44-inch. A lot of times what we'll see is that if we get one of these really big rainfall events, like if we get a tropical storm camped over the recharge zone that drops, 10 inches of rain over like a 48, 72-hour period, we'll see the aquifers very quickly respond and get back up to at least average conditions. So it probably won't take 22 inches necessarily. It's really about where the rain falls and how much of it falls, as well as antecedent conditions like soil moisture. Like if the soil is really dry and we get an inch of rainfall, the soil is going to soak up a lot of that rain, and so it's complicated, I guess.
I think I heard you say that when soil conditions are real dry, it's harder for recharge. So go into a little bit more detail because that seems counterintuitive.
Sure. Well, so if you think about like a watershed, like the scale of a watershed, so with karst aquifers, most of our recharge is happening through sort of direct recharge into karst features and caves that are within stream beds, right? But really what governs how much flow makes its way to the stream bed is, it's a variety of factors, but a lot of that rainfall is happening not directly on the stream bed, right? A lot of it is happening sort of further up on the hills that will make its way into the stream bed. Now, if the soil is really dry and we get a lot of rainfall, the soil is going to soak up a lot of that water as it's trying to make its way into the stream bed. So I'd say overall, the amount of runoff that makes its way to those features is less. And then there is a component of the water budget is diffuse flow that's not happening directly into those karst features. So that diffuse flow would obviously be going down a lot too if it's getting soaked up by soil.
Got a question for you. So with the most recent drought going into stage 4, and I know there was some hesitancy on the implications that come from going into those type of levels, does the district, do y'all review, or will y'all review the data that you received from that to make any adjustments to your drought triggers up or down associated with that real world data that you received from?
Sure. So do you mean like as we're approaching just sort of verifying the data
Right.
to make sure that we
Yeah.
cross
Yeah,
those
whether
triggers.
it's up or down, like if you need to make any adjustments to that, to those trigger levels.
Sure, yeah, and so in terms of the trigger levels and how they were arrived at, generally, we're taking the entire historical record of both Lovelady and Barton Springs flow and coming up with percentiles of above and below thresholds. So, I think periodically we do revisit that, as we add more data to those periods of record, we'll revisit it and consider revising the different levels. And then, the other thing related to crossing those thresholds is, especially lately with the first time declaring exceptional drought, we wanted to make sure that the data being reported was good data, especially given that the first threshold that was crossed was Barton Springs flow, and to measure flow from Barton Springs it's complicated, and then the amount of uncertainty with those measurements goes up as we get at lower flow values. So there was actually, the USGS gauge was reporting flow below our stage 4 trigger several months before we ended up declaring. And Justin Camp, our hydrogeologic technician, and myself we were going out and taking side-by-side measurements with the GS, and we actually determined that the flow being reported was below what the actual flow was, and the GS ended up revising those curves upward. So when we did finally declare, it was actually the Lovelady well that had crossed the threshold first. So, it's a really good question. We're using these thresholds as sort of hard regulatory triggers, but we do have to make sure that that's good, that good data is being collected. And we do the same with Lovelady well. So, Justin's always, as we're approaching those triggers, we're going out sometimes on a weekly basis to sort of verify what the USGS is reporting. Blaine?
Yeah, I can add just a little bit more to that too, that I heard last year from someone renewing their HCP, that they had to do it in a way that took climate change into account. And so our HCP from 2014 would be up for renewal in, 10, 15 years? I can't quite remember, but so that's one thing we'll have to do too with that HCP, which is tied to the Edwards aquifer. So.
And just to clarify, for those who don't know, HCP is habitat conservation. Thank you, for like endangered species and stuff from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services.
So it's my understanding that sometimes the flow reverses between Jacob's Well and Barton Springs?
I'm sorry, the flow reverses?
The flow reverses. So I'm wondering how that affects the measurements in the wells.
So Jacob's Well and Barton Springs aren't directly connected. So Jacob's Well is discharging from the Trinity Aquifer within Hayes Trinity.
But if we do dye tests at Jacob's Well, it shows up in Barton Springs.
So I'm not familiar with any dye trace that's been done at Jacob's Well that showed up in Barton Springs. Now what we have done is we know there's an indirect connection via the Blanco River. So Jacob's Well discharges into the Blanco River upstream of the Edwards recharge zone. So we know that any water that discharges from Jacob's Well, assuming that it doesn't evapotranspirate before it makes it over the recharge zone, will eventually make its way into the Edwards aquifer. I know there's been a dye tracing study that was done at Halifax Ranch, and they were able to trace dye from a karst feature at Halifax Ranch in the Blanco River all the way to Barton Springs, and then some of that dye also showed up at San Marcos Springs. But I'm not familiar with sort of any traces that have been done that show a direct connection between Jacob's Well and Barton
Check my
Springs.
info on that. That was through Master Naturalists. And I'm docent at Jacob's Well, so we say that. Maybe we need to change our information.
Well, and please take my card and feel free to email me and reach out if you have any more questions. I can share those papers with you. All right. Thanks, everybody.